You got your first FIFO gig at 23. Maybe it was an operator role in the Pilbara. Maybe it was maintenance somewhere in the Bowen Basin. Didn't matter. What mattered was the number on the offer letter. 120,000, maybe more with overtime. You'd never seen a number like that attached to your name before. You told your mates. You told your family. You felt for the first time in your life like you'd made it. The first payslip landed, and it was everything you expected. $6,000 in a fortnight. More money than your old man earned in a month when you were growing up. You bought a round at the pub on your first R&R. You upgraded the ute. You put a deposit on a jet ski because you'd always wanted one, and now, finally, you could. 3 years later, you were still on site, still doing the swings, still earning more than 90% of Australians. But something didn't add up. You looked at your bank account, and the number was fine. Not bad. But not what you expected from someone earning $150,000 a year. The jet ski was sitting in the driveway. The ute had a loan on it. The savings account had maybe $15,000 in it. And a quiet voice in the back of your head asked the question you'd been avoiding. Where did it all go? That question isn't a failure of discipline. It's a failure of explanation. Nobody ever sat you down and told you how FIFO money actually works. They told you the salary. They didn't tell you the structure. And without the structure, you were never going to keep what you earned. That changes now. By the end of this video, you'll understand FIFO finances the way they actually operate. Not as a big payslip that magically fixes everything. As a system with a specific design, specific traps, and specific ways to make it work for you instead of against you. You'll see why the very thing that makes FIFO pay high is the same thing that makes FIFO workers broke. And once you see that connection, you'll never look at your roster the same way again. Everything about FIFO money comes from two questions. Why do FIFO workers get paid so much more than everyone else? And why do so many of them end up with almost nothing to show for it? Those questions have names. The first is the premium. The second is the leak. By the end of this, you'll understand both. And you'll see that they're not two separate things at all. Before we get to either of those, you need to see where FIFO came from. Because it didn't always exist. Go back to the 1960s and 70s. Australia knew it was sitting on some of the richest mineral deposits on the planet. Iron ore in Western Australia, coal in Queensland, gas fields off the northwest coast. Billions of dollars worth of resources buried under red dirt in places so remote that the nearest town was a servo and a pub 3 hours from anywhere. The problem wasn't finding the stuff. The problem was getting people to go and dig it up. These sites were hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers from the nearest city. 45 degrees in the shade, flies, dust, nothing to do for 100 kilometers in any direction. In the early days, mining companies tried building whole towns around the mines. Karratha, Newman, Moranbah. They built houses, schools, shops, tried to create communities from scratch in the middle of nowhere. Some of those towns worked. Many didn't. People came, stayed a few years, and left. It was expensive to build, expensive to maintain, and hard to keep people when the nearest beach was a 12-hour drive away. So the industry came up with a different model. Instead of moving people to the mine permanently, fly them in, let them work a compressed roster, 2 weeks on, 1 week off, sometimes 4 and 1, sometimes 8 and 6, and then fly them home. The worker keeps their life in Perth or Brisbane or Townsville. The company gets labor without building a city, and the worker gets paid more, a lot more, because you're not just paying someone to do a job, you're paying them to leave their life behind for half the year. That's the origin of FIFO, and buried in that origin is a truth that most people never unpack. The money isn't a reward, it's compensation. Compensation for isolation. Compensation for time you don't get back. Compensation for missed birthdays, missed anniversaries, missed moments with your kids that nobody can replay. Australia had a vault full of gold buried in the desert, And the FIFO premium is the price the country pays to convince someone to walk into the desert and open it. That image matters because it explains everything that comes next. Before you can understand the premium or the leak, you need to understand the idea underneath both of them. It's called compensation for sacrifice, and it's the foundation everything else sits on. Here's what it means. When you work a normal job in the city, your salary is mostly payment for your skills and your time. An accountant gets paid for accounting. A teacher gets paid for teaching. There's a market rate for the skill, and you get something close to it. But FIFO pay doesn't work like that. A boilermaker in Sydney might earn 80,000. The same boilermaker doing the same welds on a mine site in the Pilbara earns 140. The welds are the same. The qualification is the same. The difference isn't the work. The difference is what you give up. Think of it like a sandwich. Half the filling is money. The other half is time you'll never get back. You bite into it and you taste the dollars, but you're also swallowing weeks away from home, nights sleeping in a donga, mornings waking up to an alarm at 4:30 in a room that isn't yours. The money is real, but the cost is real too. You just can't see it on a payslip. This matters because if you think of FIFO pay as normal salary but bigger, you'll spend it like a normal salary but bigger. You'll scale up your lifestyle to match the number. And that's where the trouble starts. But if you understand that a significant chunk of that pay isn't a bonus, it's compensation for something you're losing, you start treating the money differently. You start asking what this money needs to do for you long term, because the thing it cost you can't be bought back. That's the foundation. Every dollar in a FIFO payslip has two layers. One is what you earned by working. The other is what you earned by sacrificing. Ignore that second layer, and the money will vanish. Respect it, and it becomes the most powerful wealth-building tool most Australians will ever hold. With that in mind, the two tools are easy. Here's what the premium does. It's the answer to the first question. Why do FIFO workers get paid so much? The premium isn't one thing. It's built from several layers, stacked on top of each other, and most FIFO workers never pull the layers apart to see what's actually in their pay. Start with the base salary. This is what you'd earn for the same job in the city. For a lot of FIFO roles, the base sits somewhere around 70 to 90,000. Respectable, but not life-changing. It's everything on top of the base that makes the payslip look the way it does. The first layer above the base is the remote loading. This is a flat amount or a percentage the company adds specifically because the work is in a remote location. It exists to compensate for the fact that you're living in a donga in the middle of Western Australia instead of going home to your own bed every night. Depending on the site and the company, this can add 10 to 30,000 a year. The next layer is overtime and penalty rates. FIFO rosters are compressed, 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer. On many rosters, anything over 8 hours in a day or 38 hours in a week attracts overtime rates. Time and a half. Double time on Sundays or public holidays. If you're doing a 2-in-1 roster with 12-hour days, the overtime component alone can add 20 to 40,000 a year. This is where the payslip starts to look impressive. But here's what's actually happening. You're not being paid more per hour because you're special. You're being paid more per hour because you're working more hours than a normal human schedule allows, in a place where there's nothing else to do but work. The overtime isn't a bonus. It's the price of your waking hours. Then there's the living away from home allowance, or LAFA. Some employers pay this as a tax-effective allowance to cover the additional costs of living away from your usual residence. The structure and tax treatment of LAFA can vary, but when it's set up correctly, part of it may not be counted as taxable income. This is important because it means your take-home pay can be higher than someone on the same gross salary in the city. But it also means that if your roster changes or your employment structure shifts, that benefit can disappear overnight. And finally, there's superannuation. On a FIFO salary of $140,000, your employer is putting in 11.5%. That's over $16,000 a year going into your super, growing in the background. On a city salary of $80,000, that number is around $9,000. Over a 20-year FIFO career, the difference in super alone can be worth hundreds of thousands, but only if you're paying attention to where it's invested and how much you're paying in fees. Here's the key point of the premium. Your FIFO payslip is like an iceberg. The number you see on the top is the gross, but underneath it sits tax in a high bracket, super you can't touch for decades, allowances that depend on your roster staying the same, and over time that depends on you working hours that would burn out most people. The visible number is not what you take home. And if you spend based on the visible number, you'll always be behind. Now look at the other side. Here's what the leak does. It's the answer to the second question. Why do so many FIFO workers end up with almost nothing? The leak isn't one big hole. It's dozens of small ones. And most of them are invisible because they feel like rewards, not expenses. The first and biggest leak is lifestyle inflation on R&R. You've been on site for 2 weeks, 12-hour days, red dirt, donga food, limited phone signal. When you get home, you want to feel alive again. So you spend rounds at the pub, dinners out, a weekend away with your partner, new gear, boat, jet ski, ute upgrade. Each purchase feels justified. You earned it. You sacrificed for it. And individually, each one is fine. But collectively, over a year, R&R spending can consume $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 without a single line item that looks unreasonable on its own. Death by 1,000 treats. The second leak is the cost of 2 lives. This one is structural, not emotional. When you're on site, your accommodation and meals are covered. But back home, your mortgage or rent doesn't pause. Your car rego, insurance, electricity, internet, they all keep running. If you've got a partner and kids, their living costs continue whether you're there or not. Some FIFO workers are effectively paying for 2 households on 1 income. The salary looks like it's for 1 person, but it's funding 2 parallel lives. The third leak is emotional spending as compensation. This is the one nobody talks about at the safety briefing. FIFO rosters create a specific emotional pattern. You miss things. Your kid's school play, your mate's birthday, your partner's hard Tuesday when they needed you, and you were 2,000 kilometers away. When you get home, you try to make up for it. You buy things. For them. For yourself. Not because you need them, because spending feels like fixing. It feels like saying sorry without saying sorry. But the thing you're trying to fix isn't fixable with money. The time is gone. The purchase fills the gap for a day, maybe a week. Then the next swing starts, and the gap opens again. Spending on R&R to compensate for time on site is like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. Every mouthful feels like relief. Every mouthful makes the thirst worse. The fourth leak is the boom mentality. The resources industry runs in cycles. When iron ore is at $120 a ton, the phone doesn't stop ringing. Contracts everywhere. Overtime flowing. The temptation is to spend as if this is the new normal. But anyone who's been in mining long enough has seen the other side. Redundancies, sites closing, contracts not renewed. The worker who spent like the boom would never end is the one who ends up with a financed ute, a jet ski on HP, and no job. The boom doesn't last. It never has. And planning as if it will is the most expensive mistake in FIFO. The key point of the leak is this. None of these are stupid decisions. Every single one makes emotional sense. That's what makes them dangerous. They feel rational in the moment because they're responses to real pain, real sacrifice, real isolation. The leak isn't about discipline. It's about a system that creates emotional pressure and then gives you a payslip big enough to relieve it temporarily. Here's the part most people never see. The premium and the leak look like two separate things. One is about earning, the other is about spending. One is the company's decision, the other is yours, but they're not separate at all. They're the same force pulling in two directions. Think about what creates the premium. Isolation, time away from family, compressed rosters, emotional sacrifice, living in a donga instead of your home, missing the ordinary moments that make a life feel like a life. That's what the money compensates for. Now think about what creates the leak. The urge to spend on R&R. The need to buy things to make up for missed time. The emotional spending. The lifestyle inflation. The feeling that you deserve to enjoy life because you've been grinding in the dust for 2 weeks. What drives all of that? The exact same things. Isolation. Time away. Emotional sacrifice. The loneliness that earns you the loading is the same loneliness that buys the jet ski. The sacrifice that justifies the remote allowance is the same sacrifice that justifies the $2,000 weekend. The money comes from what you gave up, and it gets spent trying to get back what you gave up. It's not two problems. It's one loop. The roster creates the pressure, the payslip creates the capacity, and the spending closes the loop without ever breaking it. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you can start making different choices, not by spending less through willpower, but by understanding why you spend and building a structure that accounts for the emotional reality of the roster instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Here's what most people get wrong about FIFO money. The first mistake is thinking you earn too much to need a budget. This is the most common and the most expensive. A FIFO salary feels big enough to absorb anything. And it is, for a while. But without a structure, $150,000 a year has the same purchasing power as 70 because spending expands to fill the income. The workers who build wealth on FIFO aren't the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who built a system on day one. The second mistake is counting on the contract lasting forever. Mining is cyclical. Commodity prices move. Companies restructure. A site that's running 3 crews today might be running 1 next year. Every financial decision you make on a FIFO salary should include the question, what happens if this stops in 6 months? If the answer is, I'm in trouble, your spending is too high. The third mistake is ignoring super because the salary feels like enough. FIFO workers are in one of the best positions in the country to build serious retirement wealth, because employer contributions on high salaries compound aggressively over time. But most FIFO workers have never looked at their super allocation, have multiple accounts from different contracts leaking fees, and have never considered salary sacrificing into super while they're in a high tax bracket. The difference between a default balanced option and a high-growth option over a 20-year FIFO career can be the difference between retiring at 60 and retiring at 55 with twice the balance. The fourth mistake is not understanding your actual tax position. A FIFO worker on $150,000 is in the 37% marginal bracket. That means every extra dollar of overtime above $135,000 is taxed at 37 cents. Add the 2% Medicare levy, add HEX repayments if you've got them. By the time those layers stack up, your take-home on that overtime is closer to 60 cents in the dollar than 100. Spending as if you keep the gross is spending money that was never yours. Let me show you exactly how this knowledge is useful right now. Next time you get your payslip, sit down and separate the layers. Base salary, remote loading, overtime, LAFA, super. Work out what you actually take home after tax, Medicare levy, and any HEX repayments. That real number is your starting point for every financial decision, not the gross. If you've got a home loan, look at whether you're using an offset account. Every dollar sitting in an offset reduces the interest you pay on the mortgage. FIFO workers often have large sums sitting in a transaction account between swings doing nothing. Put that money in the offset and it works for you while you're on site. If you've had 3 or 4 FIFO contracts with different companies, check whether you've got multiple super accounts. Log into MyGov and look. Every extra account is an extra set of fees eating into your retirement balance. Consolidate into one fund. Check the allocation matches your time horizon and compare the fees. Set a fixed R&R budget before you fly home, not after. Decide what you'll spend on the week off. Put it in a separate account and enjoy it without guilt. The goal isn't to stop spending on R&R. The goal is to spend intentionally, not emotionally. There's a big difference between a weekend away you planned and a weekend away you fell into because you needed to feel something. And build an emergency fund worth at least 6 months of expenses. Not 6 months of salary. 6 months of what it costs to keep your life running if the contract ends tomorrow. In a cyclical industry, this isn't paranoia. It's the single most important financial buffer you can have. It turns a redundancy from a crisis into an inconvenience. Here's what you now know. FIFO pay isn't a normal salary with a bonus on top. It's compensation for sacrifice, built from layers that most workers never pull apart. The premium explains why the money is high. The leak explains where it goes. And the 3 most practically useful ideas are these. First, your real income is what lands in your account after tax, levy, HEX, and super, not the number on the offer letter. Every financial decision should start from that number. Second, the biggest risk in FIFO isn't losing the job. It's having the job for a decade and having nothing at the end because you never built a structure around the money. And third, the premium and the leak are the same thing. What makes you earn more is what makes you spend more. The isolation that earns the loading is the same isolation that drives the spending. When you see that, you stop fighting the symptom and start solving the cause. You stop trying to have more willpower on R&R and start building systems that account for the emotional reality of the roster. You remember that first payslip? 6,000 in a fortnight. The feeling that you'd finally made it. The truth is, that number was never the destination. It was the starting line. What you do with it over the next 5, 10, 20 years is what decides whether you walk away from FIFO with freedom or with a list of things you bought trying to fill the space the roster opened up. This is general education, not personal financial advice. If you need advice tailored to your situation, speak to a licensed financial advisor.